Welcome to Development Devil, the show where I go in depth on how certain games came into existence. Today, we'll be looking at the 7-year development of Resident Evil 4, otherwise known as Biohazard 4 in Japan, the Capcom 5, and the original prototypes of the 4th game in the beloved horror series. Resident Evil 4 began development in 1998, planned to be the first Resident Evil to take advantage of the power of the upcoming PlayStation 2. Its original story was set to be tied with the director Hideki Kamiya's earlier attempt to create Resident Evil 3, which featured the character Gonk, a USS agent which had appeared in an extra game mode in Resident Evil 2. Sadly, this version of Resident Evil 3 was cancelled, with its plot abandoned, as Kazuhiro Aoyama, a developer who had worked on all previous installments, took over with his own version of Resident Evil 3, originally named Biohazard 1.9. Later in 1999, Noboru Sugimura, the writer for Resident Evil 2, created his own scenario for Resident Evil 4 based on an idea of the directors to make a cool and stylish action game. This version of the game featured the main protagonist, Tony Redgrave, and his twin brother Paul, who were the sons of Oswell E. Spencer, the founder of Umbrella, who are the big bad pharmaceutical corporation in the Resident Evil universe. These two sons would have been superhumans infected with the progenitor virus. Throughout the development of this model, Kamiya decided Tony did not look brave and heroic enough from the series' staple fixed camera, so he decided to make the bold decision to remove the fixed camera system and instead opted to go for a more dynamic camera system. However, Shinji Mikami felt that this new version was too distant from the horror themes of the franchise and convinced the staff members to make this game separate from the Resident Evil series. This led to major script revisements and a change from viruses to demons, and the death of Tony as he was renamed to Dante. The game's new title was later revealed as Devil May Cry and finally released in August of 2001. Fast forward to 2001 and the first prototype for Resident Evil 4 was being worked on, nicknamed Castle Version. This version of the game featured Leon S. Kennedy returning as the main protagonist after his adventures in Raccoon City in Resident Evil 2. The plot of Castle is that Leon is now a soldier within the elite anti-Umbrella pursuit and investigation team, and he gets involved in a raid of Dr. Spencer's castle, which is also the Umbrella HQ location. The operation goes haywire when the squad encounter Black Fog, another bioweapon sent by the HCF as their own attack. Being the sole survivor, Leon is infected with a virus and must resist his body's mutation. This version also featured a bioweapon dog companion and the remains of an ancient underground civilization below the castle, and a scheme where Spencer attempts to achieve immortality. Even in this early version of Resident Evil 4, you can still see the resemblance of this and the final product, with the infection of Leon, the castle which is featured in the middle section of the game, and Leon finding a young woman in the castle which we can assume to be an early incarnation of the president's daughter Ashley. To make the castle's interior feel real, part of the team went out and took research photos of old European castles to help with the design and atmosphere. As work progressed with the castle model, difficulties appeared that would mean the end of this version. The Black Fog enemy, which had been intended to be the star attraction of the game, was ambitious, they admitted, and GameCube was unable to render all of the floating tentacles featured in the Black Fog without straining the system. To fix this, Kawamura created an alternate arrangement of enemies which would be hallucinatory, a side effect of Leon's mutations. This meant a revised story and change in mechanics, so the next phase in the game's development began, nicknamed Hallucination. The castle script would later be reused to create the game Haunting Ground for the PlayStation 2. Hallucination began work in late 2002 and continued throughout most of 2003. The plot of Hallucination is unknown as it was scrapped before the story was able to be revised properly, although it is known that it would have used similar concepts from the previous build, reused assets, and Leon still being infected. Most of the enemies in the game would not have been fully real, instead being in Leon's mind. An E3 demo showed living dolls and most notably, Hookman. Hallucination was also the first appearance of the red dot laser sight used in Resident Evil 4's final build to aim with weapons that did not utilize scopes. One cut combat feature that did not make it into the final cut, however, was the parry mechanic, where players could engage in a QuickTime event to dodge attacks. Considering the amount of QuickTime events already in the game, I am glad that this didn't appear in the end result. It is not apparent whether the new briefcase style of inventory management was implemented in Hallucination. The health system would also change to say caution whenever the player was low on health, instead of just showing a red bar on the bottom right of the screen. Sadly, as was the case with the first prototype, Hallucination was too technologically demanding to work on the GameCube, and as such was dropped. This then leads us to the final prototype, Zombies. Not much is known of the third iteration, except it was considered a return to formula by employees at Capcom. A new enemy type was also introduced called Doberman, which translates to pack horse in English, which is similar to how the ganados of the Finnish game translates to livestock in Spanish. After this long 5+ year development span which kickstarted 2 different game series of varying success, Resident Evil 4 was ready to release in 2005 as a GameCube exclusive. Sort of. In late 2002, Capcom unveiled the Capcom 5 video games that would be set to become GameCube exclusives at the time of their release. This agreement between Capcom and Nintendo would contain PN03, Beautiful Joe, Dead Phoenix, Killer 7, and Resident Evil 4. This would have led to a more mature lineup of games available on the system, allowing for a broad audience compared to the more kiddie appearance that the Nintendo 64 had garnered. This was possibly in retaliation to the PlayStation being seen as the grown-ups console, with games such as Metal Gear and the first 3 Resident Evils. The Capcom 5 agreement would last less than a year before PN03, short for Product Number 3, was released. The game failed both commercially and critically, convincing Capcom that it was the GameCube's fault the game had failed. This caused the Capcom 5 to fall to pieces, with the other 4 games announced for other consoles later, leaving Product Number 3 as the only real GameCube exclusive title. This affected Resident Evil 4 as well, because in 2004 it was still slated as a GameCube exclusive. And then it wasn't. Resident Evil 4 released for the first time on the 11th of January 2005, landing on the GameCube for the first few months of RE4's lifespan. Shortly after, due to the fallout of Capcom 5, it was released on the PlayStation 2 on October 25th, 2005. Slight graphical downgrades such as a lower polygon count resulting in a loss of character and environmental details. The lower graphical capabilities of the PlayStation 2 port was overshadowed, however, because along with the standard version of the game, there was now the second, shorter campaign. Separate Ways featured the player controlling fan-favorite character Ada Wong as she protects Leon in a story that directly parallels the base game's story and areas. The game's first 2 ports have a review score of 96 out of 100 on Metacritic, not counting the user score of 9.2 because there is no point in trusting Metacritic users to review a game fairly. This PlayStation 2 port would later be included in 2007's Resident Evil The Essentials collection, packaged alongside Resident Evil Code Veronica X and Resident Evil Outbreak. Also in 2007, Resident Evil 4 was ported to multiple platforms such as the PC, in a port developed by the company Source Next, first published in Hong Kong by Typhoon Games, and then receiving a wider release later in the year, this time published by Ubisoft. Soon after the PC port was released, Resident Evil 4 would make its way to the Wii with its trademarked pointing and motion sensing capabilities, although this version of the game also featured original GameCube and classic controller support. This Wii version would include all extra content from the PC and PlayStation 2 version. The trailer for the upcoming Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles. Surprisingly, during the craze of iPhone games in the late 2000s and early 2010s, Resident Evil 4 Mobile Edition would be announced, releasing exactly 1 year after the PC port in Japan, and then everywhere else in 2009. The game's original story flow was slightly changed into smaller sections to accommodate the smaller hardware, and utilizes the Mascot Capsule Eruption engine. This port would first be released on iOS and the, Zeebo. This game really did release on fucking everything, huh? The game would later receive a second release on digital phones called Resident Evil 4 for Beginners, which was a free version of the game featuring 2 levels of story mode and mercenary mode, with the rest of the game being locked behind a paywall. Then, once more the game would get a third life on Apple devices through a HD update in the brand new, totally not reported from the iPhone, Resident Evil 4 iPad Edition, which technically makes the iPad version of the game the first to receive HD treatment. The next release of the acclaimed video game would come on September 20th, 2011. This next release would be for the PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Games on Demand service, serving as a proper console high-definition version. 3 years later, Capcom would proceed to release Resident Evil 4 once again on Windows as the Resident Evil 4 Ultimate HD Edition, but not before creating a fourth mobile port in 2013 for Android devices. 2 years after the release of Resident Evil 4 Ultimate HD Edition, the game would again be released for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Then again, Resident Evil 4 would become handheld once more to be used for the Nintendo Switch port, released worldwide on May 21st, 2019. But it doesn't stop here, because in October of 2021, a full 16 years after Resident Evil 4's original release, the game would have a VR port released, using Unreal Engine 4, brand new textures and an increased resolution. Sadly, this version had multiple inappropriate animations removed to make it more appealing to modern audiences. According to the executive producer of the VR port, Tom Ivey. Pussy. And that concludes the entire history of Resident Evil 4's ports. Next, we'll have a look at how it was received critically. I guess you could call it a look at its critical... The game was and has been treated as one of the best video games of all time, and for good reason. The game's gameplay is top tier, with in-depth fight choreography leading to some brutal ways to defend yourself from enemies, as well as kill them. The game manages to be more action-focused than previous RE titles, while also not going too over the top, most of the time. The game treads the line of action and horror well, creating a beautiful blend that works perfectly to create a suspenseful atmosphere where you never know what's coming next, but are never too afraid to find out. The PC version of the game is notorious for bad PC aiming controls, so it's sad that it sits at a lower rating than other versions of RE4, with a 76 out of 100 on Metacritic. On the sales side of things, throughout all the versions of Resident Evil 4, it has sold a total of 11 million copies, and held the record for best-selling survival horror game in the 2012 Guinness World Record Gamers Edition. Truly a hardcore read. Resident Evil 4 has received multiple Game of the Year awards and is consistently ranked in lists of the best video games ever created. Even in 2021, it has been given the Virtual Reality Game of the Year award at the Game Awards, when it isn't even a real VR game. Clearly, it won all of these awards because of Resident Evil's most famous feature, eggs. My thoughts on Resident Evil 4 are as follows. Resident Evil 4 is a game that has so many ways to play. It is such an accessible experience, being available on every platform that exists nowadays, and the control scheme still holds up even to this day, except if you're on PC. Combat and movement are incorporated with certain moves to create an epic style of combat that really makes me enjoy the experience and keeps me coming back to replay it at least once a year. The story of a government operative being sent to rescue the president's daughter, continually ramping up from a small village filled with hostile locals to a lake with a giant mutant fish boss to fight this massive, sprawling castle filled with parasitic organisms, all the way to boss fights with mutant humans that have been overtaken by the demonic creatures trying to take over the world, which ends in an amazing over-the-top jet ski scene as you race out of an exploding island, all became factors which created the classic B-movie horror action feel that Resident Evil is perfect at creating nowadays. The cheesy dialogue and abnormal characters really make you feel like the Resident Evil. The weapon play is fine-tuned to walk the line of never making you too underpowered, but also giving you just too little firepower that you need to use your head to run away, use the environments around you to fight Ganados. Everything is just perfect. Admittedly, the graphics have not aged as well as you would probably hope, but it never gets in the way or breaks the immersion. There are some errors in the game, such as the game's annoying QuickTime events and PC controls, but I truly believe that Resident Evil 4 is one of the best games ever created. Right behind New Super Mario Bros. 2 for the 3DS, of course. Resident Evil 4 redefined the action horror genre forever, and is considered Resident Evil's peak, magnum opus perhaps. The more action-focused shift would change the series' course forever, however, as Capcom, seeing the success of Resident Evil 4, decided to turn Resident Evil 5 and 6 into almost pure action titles, with little survival horror elements that made the past entries so enjoyable. This would end up becoming the downfall of Resident Evil as a franchise, as 5 was received generally as a game that could have used more horror, but still stood on its own as a good title. Whereas the 6th main entry went completely action-focused, which was met with backlash because of its confusing plotlines and loss of what made the original games such good experiences. The only saving grace of the 6th game nowadays is that if you play it with another person it can be a genuinely fun experience. If you can survive all of the quick-time events, and the gameplay of Resident Evil 6 is actually fun, with the movement having so many varying combinations that creates an actually enjoyable experience that I found myself enjoying very much, with the story simultaneously becoming even more cheesy and even more absurd with every single level. Resident Evil 6 may not have been a good horror game, but now looking back on it, it sure was a good damn action game. Resident Evil 4's on the series would later be neutered by Resident Evil 7, which was a much more horror-focused game, returning to its roots and becoming much more closed in scope. Then Resident Evil 8 swoops in, practically a spiritual successor to Resident Evil 4 but in first person, with the same inventory, same trading systems, and even similar areas and references to its forefather. Resident Evil 8 is what I consider to be the true best game in the Resident Evil series, as it has so much that made Resident Evil 4 great whilst also expanding on everything that we love about the series. Resident Evil 4 might be 16 years old, but we still feel its ripple effects to this day, and I can't wait to see what happens in Resident Evil 9, because the series really seems to have become beloved once again after the shit show that was 5 and 6. Resident Evil 4's development may have spanned several years, with many prototypes being created and destroyed to create what I think may be one of the best video games ever created. My name is Sky, and this has been the Development Devil Resident Evil 4 episode. Remember to subscribe if you enjoyed this video and want to see others like it in the future. Until next time, may all your games be good ones.